This is Weekend Mornings with Stirling Faux on 980 CKNW.
Nice to have you this Sunday morning. So we continue to unravel the we scandal. Mr. Trudeau and others in his government testified before the Commons Committee earlier this week, including the Kielburger brothers, Craig and Mark, talking to the Commons Committee about the inner workings of we, the charity, and their relationship with the government of Canada. All of that aside, one of the things we have found this week is the nature of business activity conducted by We Charity, and there are multiple layers and layers of corporate and charitable enterprises. Someone paid nearly 200 people to promote positive We Charity stories on Google. And we also learned this week the Trudeau government handed over ownership of personal data from anyone applying for a student grant to We Charity. Our next guest says, this stuff just does not pass the smell test well at all. In fact, it's borderline highly unethical. Our next guest joining us from Toronto is Robert Burko. Mr. Burko is CEO of the marketing agency Elite Digital. Robert Burko, good morning and welcome.
Good morning to you, sir.
It's great to have you with us, Robert. Let's talk a little bit about this, the practice, first of all. The headline story in the National Post, which quoted you, by the way, reacting to it, talked about people, 200 of them, promoting positive We Charity stories on Google. Is this, in business, Robert, the equivalent of my opening a restaurant and having my sister-in-law post a rave review on Yelp?
So it's very, very similar to exactly that. I mean, it sort of crosses, as I mentioned in the article, it crosses an ethical line, because if you open that restaurant and you go get your family members and your close friends to say, hey, I know you haven't eaten at my restaurant yet, but can you please go and give me 5 stars on every review site? Right. Or if you launch a new product on Amazon and, we all buy stuff off Amazon and we all look at that ratings, for you to go and say, hey, can everyone go and call my product the greatest product ever, right, and leave me 5-star reviews? It's basically akin to that. Essentially, it's trying to game the system, and inherently, when you do that you're not really playing by the rules, and Google itself has outlined the rules, and we know this goes against them.
So what, technically, Robert, thank you for that, first of all, and let's talk now about what rules were broken, and does Google enable breaking of their own rules? How does that work?
So we have to take a step back, right? And I don't want to get technical, but fundamentally, it boils down to a question of, do we understand how Google works? Now, to the average person out there, here's what they know. They type something into Google, and literally milliseconds later, all these results show up. And most people, they never get to page 2. Right. Most of your people listening right now probably don't even know page 3 exists on Google. So whatever comes up first is what we see. Now, there's no one sitting in the office at Google saying, oh, Stirling just searched for Robert Burko, let's show him the results. There's no individual sitting there. It's all algorithm-based, right? It's computers figuring this out. And like any algorithm, any computer program, there's ways to say, oh, here's how the algorithm works, and here's sort of how I can, manipulate it and possibly use it to my advantage. In the digital marketing world, they sort of control where your website shows up. It's called search engine optimization.
Exactly.
And there's good ways to do it. There's good, highly ethical ways. At Elite Digital, we help people across the country do this properly. It happens to be called white hat SEO. And then there's the dark side of this, the underbelly of it, which is called black hat SEO. And that's where you really break the rules. And Google most certainly does not want you to do that. And when Google catches you, they do not pull their punches, and there are serious consequences. That's
because Google makes money, and I would imagine, Robert, I don't know any numbers, but I would imagine a considerable amount of money every year getting people to pay them for this search engine optimization. So when I punch in, a marketing expert, I'm going to get Robert Burko at the top of my Google's search results. And you pay for that. I
certainly hope you do. I certainly hope you do, and I'm very proud of that. It's taken me a long time to get there. But, yeah, I mean, the key thing to understand is when we all use Google, everybody listening right now uses Google, and no one is paying Google for that, right? We all use Google for free.
Sure.
But the way Google makes money is by selling ads. Now, in order to sell ads, Google needs to make sure their search engine is useful. So from Google's standpoint, if everyone started getting really lousy results on Google, we'd all jump to another search engine. Mm-hmm. That would be bad for Google. So Google wants to make sure it shows you the most relevant results possible for your search. and that's a good thing for Google, and it's a good thing for us as the users of Google.
Yep.
But if people try to trick the system and say, I'm going to show this article, this amazingly positive story because I'm trying to break the rules, then Google's algorithm shows you that, but it's not necessarily what makes the most sense. And that's sort of the underbelly of this, where people do unethical things to try to put a story in front of you that if Google catches them, they're going to get in trouble. But up until the point that they get caught, they sort of reap the benefits of breaking the rules.
Interesting. So the subheader on the story that brought us to you in the first place, Robert, the Google manipulation campaign, where it was used to boost the visibility of two positive stories about we while burying any potential negative coverage. And again, they paid nearly 200 people to get involved in this campaign on Google. So do we know how much the individuals were paid? And what exactly were they supposed to do?
Yeah, so I mean, there's parts of the story that we know and don't know. We fundamentally know this happened, and we understand, at a very macro level, we get it, right? And we've all done it. Everybody searches for their name on Google to see what comes up, and certainly you don't want a negative story, so pushing the bad stuff down, the good stuff up, we all understand that. Now, what they basically tried to do here, which basically I would never recommend to anybody at all, is they tried to get people to search on Google, click on this positive story, and then spend some time on the resulting website, with the idea being, if we can show Google that this link is popular, look at all the people clicking on this amazing story.
Sure.
Google thinks that's popular, rises it up in the rankings, and as soon as that good article goes up, the bad article goes down, and basically that's what they were trying to do, was push the bad stuff down, rise the good stuff to the top. It's no different than Google uses a lot of social signals to figure out what they should rank. So if everybody starts talking on Twitter, for example, about a certain story, Google thinks it's important and moves that up. It's essentially the same thing that happened here.
Okay, and so of course this is clearly a policy. This is we're going to our next step in bringing our brand to even more prominence is going to be the manipulation of Google. And were there other platforms that they attempted to do similar exercises on? Do you know, Robert?
So we know on Wikipedia there's some questionable things happening. If you go to the We Charity pages on Wikipedia, there's some comments there from some editors saying someone should fact check this. It feels like this is sort of been orchestrated by the company. Now, all of this is speculation. We don't know, it's possible someone other than We Charity did this. It's possible We Charity did it themselves. It's possible We Charity hired an agency who did not have proper ethical practices, and they did this. So we do not know. But is it possible that they were in a boardroom somewhere saying, I don't like these bad stories that show up when I search for my name on Google.
Right.
Please move these down and move these up. Could that have happened? Yes. Does it look like that happened? It does. Do we follow the paper trail all the way back to see who ordered it? We simply don't know. But the optics of this, alongside everything else, most certainly don't look good. This would be frowned upon by Google, frowned upon by myself and others in the industry, because there is very much a right way to do this and a wrong way to do this. And if what happened and what it looks like happened, this is certainly not good.
Well, again, quoting you from the National Post, as a veteran of the industry, I frown on all of this, and I suspect your peers across the digital marketing industry would be sharing that sentiment this morning, Robert.
Absolutely. I mean, I've done this for 18 years now, and fundamentally, my clients come to me and they say, listen, Rob, we want to rank well on Google and we want to do positive things. And I say, great, no problem. We can happily help you with that. However, there is an ethical way to do it, right? The way you get good reviews for your restaurant is by having good service,
sure,
by offering good food. The way you can build your website and showcase all the good you're doing in the world, there are ways to do this properly. So when myself and other experts in the digital marketing industry look at this, we say, wow, they could have done this properly. Okay, they could have just let the good work they were doing speak for itself and sort of let things happen organically. But to say, let's aggressively try to manipulate this kind of taints the entire thing.
Interesting. And of course, the proof is in the pudding in terms of the reaction to a lot of corporate sponsors of this enterprise, many of whom have already withdrawn, thinking TELUS here in the West. And of course, Doug Ford's government of Ontario disconnected from We just a couple of days ago. Robert, let me just take a second and do some commercial stuff here. And when we come back, I want to talk about the other story that's front and center this weekend, the Trudeau government handing We a personal data gold mine. On the line from Toronto is Rob Burko. He is the CEO of Elite Digital, and we'll be back with lots more after this.
This is Weekend Mornings with Stirling Fox on 980 CKNW.
747 in conversation with Robert Burko, CEO of Elite Digital, an online marketing firm. Mr. Burko's been in the business for close to 20 years, and he's talking to us this morning about the We charity as we peel back more and more layers of the onion of this much multi-layered enterprise, some charitable, some not so much. We're learning today about a website, recently at least, due to the very good work of Brian Lilly over at Post Media, Rob. The government launched a website, and I'm on it right now, called iwantahelp.org. And if you go to the site, it's very glossy. It's got the Canada logo, empowering students, supporting communities. Welcome to the Canada Student Service Grant. It encourages you, the visitor, to apply and for these grants. It explains how you could earn from $1,000 to $5,000 once you complete your qualifying volunteer hours and so on. It's very polished. Why apply for the program, et cetera, et cetera. Very encouraging of your participation. So lots of people clearly have signed up. So tell us about what happens to this information, because the headline story was, according to Post Media, Trudeau government handed We a personal data gold mine. How so, Rob?
So you got to remember, these days, and we have to know this going into the story, data is worth money. Okay, the more you know about people at a large extent, the better it is for these organizations. So there is so much incredible value in data. And what we're looking at here is basically when everybody signed up for this site, and everybody, you, me, everybody listening, we all fill out registration forms all the time on different websites.
You bet.
And for sure, we do it all the time. And the big question is, where does that data go?
Yep.
And more so than where does it go, who's in charge of it? Who's in control of it? What are they doing with it? Are they ethical? Are they going to do good things? Are they going to safeguard it? One of the very first things I would say to everybody listening, and they're going to sort of roll their eyes after I say this, a lot of people who are listening probably have accounts on different websites, okay? We all log into a million different things online. Our life is online these days. Mm-hmm. Most people generally, use the same password on a lot of different websites. And I bet people listening right now are like, oh, my goodness, how does this guy know that I use the exact same password on all these different websites? Now, let me tell you right away, if you are listening to this and you are like, how does this guy know what I do? Please stop. You got to start changing your passwords, because the problem is not every site that you hand over your data to, it has the integrity that we want it to have.
Sure.
And the problem is, if your data is out there, and fundamentally all of our data is out there, we have to know where it's going. We want to know where it's going. I would bet very few people read the privacy policies on all the websites they visit.
They just click agree or accept and move on, don't they?
100%. No one has time to read these terms of service, so I get it, and that's fine. But we have to trust the other people on the other end are using our data wisely. Right. Now, when the government hands over data to an organization, we hope they've done their due diligence. Right? At Elite Digital, we get audited to make sure our data protection policies are top tier and best in class, and we're very strict about that. Not all companies are. So when the government hands over all this data, we have to ask, well, where is it going? And more so than that, what country is it going to? Because the story that you're talking about right now results in our Canadian data actually residing in the U.S. Now, the U.S. has totally different privacy laws. Did people know their information was going to the U.S.? How do they feel about it? And what does that mean? So we live in a day and age where privacy is important, and maybe at the same time privacy doesn't exist to the extent we want, because our information is all out there, and potentially based on what we're hearing, the government may have just handed it over.
Well, Rob, I suppose I'm a little confused. All of a sudden, it didn't take long. It's early in the day. How did the information from young Canadians applying for the student grant program for this volunteer thing to the government through We, how did that information end up in the United States? Is it because We has an American affiliate? They share databases? How did it get to the States?
So great question. So what we're learning is basically very few companies sort of operate end-to-end on their own without using another third party, right? Okay. The digital world is an ecosystem of interconnected puzzle pieces, and that's how it works. And we all hear the term the cloud. My data is going to the cloud.
Yeah.
And most people, if you say, what is the cloud? They literally have no idea.
Yes.
I have 3 little kids at home. I asked them the other day, what is the internet? And their responses were hysterical. Most people don't actually know what this is. Now, when we talk about the cloud, we're basically talking about a computer server sitting in a fancy data center somewhere. That's what we're talking about. Now, in this case, it looks like We Charity used an American company to house some of the data. So although you were giving your data to, let's say, a Canadian organization, We Charity, endorsed by the Canadian government, because the service they were using was U.S.-based, the data fundamentally ended up in the U.S., and that changes the game. That changes the laws that apply to it. That changes the regulations. So that's how sort of no one knew this was happening, and yet at the same time, it happened exactly that way.
Do we have any evidence at all that the data was shared by anyone, and did anyone profit from the sharing of data, if indeed that happened?
So right now, we simply don't know. Right now, the story is sort of following the bouncing ball to say, hey, the data was here. Here's what happened. We are obviously, as you mentioned earlier, there's so many layers to this story.
No kidding.
What we fundamentally know now is We Charity was using this company in the U.S. Now, we have no reason to believe the company in the U.S. is doing bad things with it. They could be a very reputable company.
Sure.
They could be trustworthy. They could safeguard the data. So it's not a matter of fact of this is not there was a security breach. No one should panic. That is not what happened. Okay. Up until this point, there has been no breach. We do not know if anything bad has happened.
Right.
All we know is that the data that was given is fundamentally now sitting somewhere in the U.S. with another company. And it's not like it's one person's data. It's a lot of data. And that matters. And it matters more not because what's happened so far with it, but what is going to happen and what could happen. And all of us as Canadians kind of need to be saying our privacy is important. And if the government is going to go and hand it over to someone, have they checked all the boxes and done their due diligence? If they have, fine, the data has to exist. If they haven't, I'd kind of like the bar to be a little bit higher.
Well, and if there's one thing that has become painfully clear to all Canadians of all political persuasions, the government dropped the ball on this one in terms of checking boxes and the obvious need to do due diligence. We've seen flustering civil servants and politicians stammering and yammering and trying to bluster their way through, not having done due diligence, and even when they were confronted by sufficient evidence, they indulged and participated in the process and didn't recuse themselves. So there's a lot of balls been dropped and a lot of boxes possibly not checked here, which is why I suppose, Rob, so many of us are just flat out nervous about this stuff.
Well, I think a lot of us are just left scratching our head. I mean, listen, the reality is if I have to go buy a new TV, I am reading every review. I'm looking at every spec. I am doing my unbelievable due diligence. And that's a TV I'm buying.
That's right.
This was a very big program with lots at stake. And it was a program designed to do good. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that's the unfortunate part is the intentions of the program were good, but everything around it was bad. And where I'm annoyed is if they just would have done their due diligence, there is another way for this to play out that is very, very different. Because if they had done the same amount of research that I do when I'm buying a TV, maybe all these questions we're asking now would have been asked before. And then we're talking about something else.
Absolutely. An email here from Todd as we've been talking. 30 seconds left to deal with his point. Todd says there needs to be a full investigation by the Privacy Commissioner, along with the ethics and the other people. He says they should get involved. Do you agree?
I do. I mean, we have to. Our data is important. As Canadians, our data is important. Where's our data? How did it get there? And most importantly, what's happened has already happened. How do we prevent this from happening again? You know, at Elite Digital, we always talk about key learnings, and I want to know, this is a bad situation right now. What are the key learnings? Because we don't have a time machine, we can't go back in time, but what can we do as a community, as a society, to make sure this kind of stuff simply does not happen again?
Excellent stuff. Robert Burko, thank you so much for being with us today. We do appreciate your visit, and we must do this again. It was great fun, and you're a sharp guy to have on the radio. We appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Have a great day.
You too. Enjoy the rest of your long weekend. Civic holiday in Ontario. There's Rob Burko, CEO of Elite